Hello, my dear friends. I hope you're all doing very well. Shavua Tov. I hope you had a nice Shabbat. We are going to be learning tonight the laws of studying Torah. And not just studying Torah, but also teaching Torah, etc. As we shall see, the Rambam begins by telling us that there are two commandments over here. The commandment of studying Torah and the commandment to honor those who study it and know it. So this is what we're going to be learning over the next couple days. We're going to be learning all about the idea of studying Torah, which is essentially what we're doing right now. So we're going to be learning about what we are doing. So join along, chapter 1 of the Laws of Talmud Torah, which means to study Torah. So he starts off in discussing who is obligated to study Torah. So in regards to the in general, when we're speaking about studying of Torah, so there are various types of study. There is a study to know what we have to do. For instance, studying the laws of Shabbat, for instance, let's say. So we have to know how to keep Shabbat. So in that, anyone who is obligated to keep Shabbat obviously has to learn how to keep Shabbat. Similarly, if we're talking about love or fear of God, which is a mitzvah which is incumbent upon every person, so therefore everyone has to study this. But when we're talking about study just for the sake of study, which is what we're going to be discussing right now, in other words, there is a mitzvah at every moment for a person to be studying Torah, whenever they have a free moment. So then there are differences in the laws of who is obligated to study Torah. And the Rambam tells us that this mitzvah of studying at every moment and studying Torah just on a general basis, just for the reason of study, so that only men are obligated to study Torah. But on the other hand, women or children are going to be free from this obligation. But nevertheless, although children are not obligated to study Torah, still there is an obligation upon a father to teach his child, even though he is a minor, as it says in the verse, and you shall teach them to your sons to speak about them. So we have a mitzvah to teach our children Torah. On the other hand, a woman, since she herself is not obligated to study Torah at every moment, so therefore she is also exempt from the mitzvah of teaching her child. Of course, she is able to, if she would like to, and if it's needed. So then, of course, she is able to teach her child Torah. But the obligation is on a father to teach his son. Just as a person is obligated to teach his son, so too he has to teach his grandchild. And the truth is not just only his own children, but in truth, any person who knows Torah, person who has a knowledge and wisdom of Torah, is a sage in Torah, it is put upon him this obligation of teaching Torah to other people. And as it says in the verse that it says, you shall teach them to your sons, it doesn't only mean your own physical children, but it also means anyone who you are able to teach goes into this obligation. And but of course, if a person has a son, so then the son will be first place, so to speak. He will have the obligation first to teach him, and only then, if he has more time, he's able to teach another child or other people. And he has to take a teacher. A father is obligated to take a teacher to teach his child Torah. And although in essence a teacher who is teaching Torah should do it for free, because as we were going to see, that it says that when God gave the Torah, He gave it to us for free. So therefore we should also teach Torah for free. And in general, when a teacher is teaching, or a parent is teaching a student or his child Torah, so he should teach them, because teaching is what is going to bring us to action. So if we want to have the action to be in the proper way, we have to teach them first so that they can come to the action. Now, what if a person has to study Torah and he also has to teach his child Torah? But so first he has to take a teacher for himself, and only then should he take a teacher for his child. But if his child is very smart and he's going to be able to study better than what he himself is able to study, so then he should actually teach his child, although he should himself also study as well. The Rambam tells us that when a person is supposed to study Torah, which this is essentially throughout their life, but a person who is going to invest time in studying properly, if we're going to say to go to rabbinical school or a Torah college, so then he should do this before getting married, because once a person gets married, they get busy and they have a lot of things, many worries that are on their responsibilities on their head, and they won't be able to focus on the study properly. But on the other hand, the Rambam says that if a person feels that his inclination in his heart is very strong and he's not able to study properly because he doesn't have a wife, so then he should get married and then study Torah. So now, when do we have to start teaching our children Torah? So the Rambam says that this begins when a child begins to speak. Then the father has an obligation to teach his son Torah. And he starts off simple with the verses, how Torah tziva lanu Moshe, that we got the Torah from Moses, and this is an inheritance for every Jewish person. And the verse of Shema Yisrael, Hear O Israel, the Lord is our God, that the Lord is one. And slowly he teaches the child more and more until he is 6, 7 years old, and then he'll take him to school and he's going to learn better and more at depth as he gets older. Now, when he talks about the idea of paying for a teacher, so a father should pay the teacher, but on the other hand, in essence, the teacher should not charge, because as we said earlier, when God gave us the Torah, He gave it to us for free. So too also, when a person teaches, he should also teach for free. But again, if there only is a place where they are charging, so then of course we have to study Torah, whether it costs money or not. But he says, on the other hand, that if the custom of the place is that the teacher takes money, so then he takes money. I guess he has to survive at the end of the day. But essentially, the best way to teach Torah is by doing it for free. And he says that this obligation of studying Torah is upon every single Jewish man, whether he is rich or poor, whether he is sick or not, whether he is young or old, even someone who is so poor that he's only living off charity and he's begging for money at people's doors, or whether he had a wife and children, every person needs to have a time to study every single day. So even if a person is not able to study at every hour of the day, which is essentially when the mitzvah of studying Torah is incumbent upon us, but still, a person has to have time to study in the day and in the night. And that's something which is very, very important. It's a very basic idea in Judaism that we have to have time to study. We need to make a time in the morning or in the day and in the evening or at night to always be studying Torah, because this is what it's all about. This is our Judaism. This is a way to connect to God. It's one of the most amazing ways of connecting to God. When we study God's wisdom and it becomes part of who we are, it's an unbelievable unification and connection that we can have with God. And therefore, we should do it every single day. And there were great sages throughout history who, even though they were wood choppers or water drawers or even blind, despite all these difficulties, they every single day had time when they would put themselves involved in studying Torah. Until when is this obligation on a person that they have to study Torah? The Rambam says, until the day that a person dies. as it says in the verse, lest you remove it from your heart all the days of your life. So, if a person is not studying, then it's going to be removing itself from a person's heart. He's going to start forgetting it. So therefore, we have to always be studying. Now, when we're talking about the study of Torah, what should a person study? You're right, the Rambam is telling us a person has to always study. Well, there's one idea where a person has to study the laws of what they have to know. So as we said earlier, every single person has to do that. But when we're talking over here that a person has to study Torah in general every single day, so how should he split up his time of study? What should he put his focus on? So the Rambam says that there are actually 3 different types of study. There is studying the written text, the Torah, or the Bible. That's number 1. The written form of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, or the Tanakh, the 24 books. Now, that's one type. So that's 1/3 of our time should be spent on studying the Torah. The second third should be spent on studying the oral law, which is the explanation of the Torah. All the explanation for all the mitzvahs. For instance, what we're doing right now, where we're studying Rambam. In Rambam, he comes and he explains us, this is the oral law, explaining us what the written law is all about. And the third, which a person should focus their time on study, is the idea called Talmud. Talmud is where you take the essence of the law and you start to understand it in its depth, where you start comparing one law to another and you want to derive something from something else, and going into the depth really of trying to understand all the reasons and all the depths of every single law. And this is what Talmud is all about. And this is the third segment, the third type of study that a person has to do as well. So the Rambam tells us if a person is working for a few hours every day, so now the Rambam tells us he has 9 hours left a day that he's able to study. It's a lot of hours. So, but in this case, in this case that the Rambam puts before us, this person has 9 hours of study that he's able to do every day. So he should split up his time. 3 hours study the written law, 3 hours he should study the oral law, and 3 hours to study Talmud. Now, what about a person who has studied all the written law very well? If you're studying it 3 hours a day, after a certain point, you should know the written law very well. And the truth is that you should also know the explanation of the law pretty well, because you've already gotten very involved and you studied it for 3 hours every day for, let's say, 5 years. Well, what happens then? I know the Rambam backwards and forwards. So the Rambam tells us that at that point, a person should study Talmud and start going into the depth of the study for the entire time of his study. And he says that when we're talking about Talmud, it doesn't only mean the book of Talmud, but rather it means all the depth of the Torah, which also would include what is called Pardes, which is the secret part of the Torah. So you have the Kabbalah, which is one type of study, which that is actually included with the written part of the Torah. So that's in the first third. But the ideas of the Pardes, they are included in the third type of study, which is included in the Talmud study, which that would be to study all about the greatness of God, the greatness of creation, how we have to serve God, and the depth of every mitzvah, the depth of our Judaism, which is a very important part of our study. And the Rambam tells us that this is a very essential part, and this is what we should be focusing our study on as well. When we're talking about in the laws of who is obligated to study Torah, we said we have men who are obligated to study Torah every single day, and therefore they get reward according to their obligation. A woman, since she is not obligated to do that, so she is definitely permitted to study Torah, but even though when she does study it, she does not get the same amount of reward per se, so to speak, as a man, because she is not obligated. However, she definitely is allowed to study Torah, and it's a positive thing. Now, we do find the sages in the Talmud and other places, they write that a person should not teach their daughters Torah. Back in the day, girls didn't go to school in the same way as they go today, and the Talmud said because they are not involved in understanding very wisdom and knowledge, so on and so forth, so therefore it's better to keep them away from the study of Torah. Although the written Torah there is more place for a woman or a girl to be studying Torah, but the truth is that today, over the last, I would say, 100 years, girls in society, girls have been going to school and been studying in general, and therefore there definitely is a very important concept that women and girls growing up should study Torah. And today, in pretty much across the board, girls are studying Torah in schools and they're learning a lot and delving into it, although in previous generations that had not been. But actually the Lubavitcher Rebbe very much encouraged this idea of girls going to school and studying Torah, and actually opened up a girls' school in New York back in 1942 in Brooklyn for Jewish children, a Jewish day school for girls where they should be able to come and study Torah. So that's the idea of studying Torah, and that is the first chapter of the Laws of Study Torah. So my friends, we're going to be going through the Laws of Studying Torah, which is a very important fundamental in Judaism. We are the nation of the book, so we have to know what it's all about. How this law of studying Torah, which is on its own, it's a very important idea, and it's also a mitzvah. Actually, we have a mitzvah upon us that we are obligated to study Torah. So it's a very powerful concept. So join us over the next couple days as we go through this. It's going to be very interesting. All right, all the best, my friends.